Hi, thank you for registering for our virtual Rock Out program. We missed you at our live Zoom recording, but hopefully you enjoy this recorded version of the program. My name is Griffin Bray. I'm filling in for Amanda Felk. We both work at Oakland County Parks as naturalists. Amanda at the Red Oaks Nature Center in Madison Heights, and myself at the Wind Nature Center in Clarkston. Now, for the Rock Out program, we're going to be looking a little bit about the history of Michigan and some of the cool rocks that we have here, as well as learning to polish our own stone. Now, before we get started, there are just a couple of upcoming programs that I'd like to make you all aware of. As far as virtual programs like these go, we have 3 upcoming programs in the rest of the year. In October, we have a Bug These Plants program where you'll learn all about carnivorous plants and get to grow your own sundew. In November, we have Eco Friends, Don't Trash Cans, where you'll learn about creative ways to reuse old tin and aluminum cans. And in December, we have a virtual self-led kit without virtual instructions on creating a birch Yule log to use in your holiday festivities. Now, in person at the Wind Nature Center in Independence Oaks in Clarkston, we have a creepy cryptid hike on October 22nd, where you can learn all about the cryptids in our woods, like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Michigan Dogman, and whether or not they exist. And we also have Eye of Newt and Tail of Dog, a program on potion ingredients and the real-life plants that inspired them. At the Red Oaks Nature Center in Madison Heights, we have our Nature Fit Bat Walk on September 24th and a magnificent magical monarch program on September 26th. Now that we have the commercials out of the way, we can get started learning about your rocks. Now, the rocks that we have in our kits today, these small little gray stones, first showed up in Michigan around 350 million years ago in a time period called the Devonian. Now, long ago, in the Triassic period, we had that large continent, Pangaea. Now, the Devonian was hundreds of millions of years before Pangaea even formed. And as such, we had several large continental islands floating around in the ocean. Now, Michigan wasn't in the space where it occupies today. In fact, Michigan is right where this star was. The land that now is Michigan and the Midwest region used to be a shallow equatorial sea in the tropics. Now, this shallow sea had a lot of things that we associate with shallow seas like the Caribbean today. We had lots of different fishes, lots of different sharks, as well as coral reefs, including this colonial coral, Hexagonaria percarinata. Now, as this was 350 million years ago, we can only guess at what Hexagonaria percarinata actually looked like. Probably something like this, with a central disc and then some rays coming out. Now, colonial corals, like Hexagonaria, are collections of small animals, similar in a way to sea anemones or jellyfish. They have a mouth right around the center and then small little tendrils that come out and help grab food. Now, they also have a shell. So when the coral itself dies, over time, that shell might become fossilized. Now, this did happen for Hexagonaria percarinata, and we've found some of these fossils in Michigan. They've actually turned out looking pretty cool. But before I get to the fossils, I do want to give you a little vocabulary word. Peteskey. Now, Peteskey was a Native American chief, an Ottawa chief, and his name means rays of the rising sun. Now, it just so happens in Michigan, we have found stones that have a pattern very similar to the rays of the rising sun, a nice central disc, and all of these beautiful rays coming out of there. And these stones share an anglicized version of this name, which also is attached to a city right around where you can find these stones. Now, if you guessed that this picture is a Peteskey stone, you'd be correct. Now, Peteskey stones may actually be named after the city of Petoskey. They just happen to have that rising ray pattern also, rising sun pattern, because you can find a lot of them near Petoskey and right along the Lake Michigan shoreline. Now, if you get lucky, you might find some in inland quarries or gravel pits, but the majority of these stones will be found on rocky beaches, especially in early spring right after ice comes through and breaks up large rocks, and wave actions bring them to the shore. So, if you're willing to get a little bit chilly to find some really cool stones, go out right around the end of end of March, early April into May, and you might find some really nice Petoskey stones. Just be sure that you're collecting from areas that you can legally collect Petoskey stones. Now, of course, Petoskey stones, hexagonaria, are not our only fossils. We have tons of other fossils from the long ago period. For instance, you might recognize some stones like the Charlevoix stone, a stone that looks kind of similar to a Petoskey, but is slightly different. That is another fossil from long ago. We also have fossilized trilobites, brachiopods, or shelled marine animals, and a whole ton of other corals and animals. So even if you don't find a Petoskey stone while looking, you might find some of these other really cool fossils that tell you a lot about our past history. Now, of course, your Petoskey stone, that little gray rock we're going to be polishing today, is actually our state rock. It's a fossil, but it's our state rock. Now, in addition to having a state rock, which is a fossil, we also have a state fossil, which is also a fossil. That state fossil is the American mastodon, an ancient furry elephant-like creature that used to roam the woodlands and plains of Michigan long after the Peteskey Stones, long after the hexagonaria coral passed away. If you go to museums like the Cranbrook Institute of Science, you can see reconstructed mastodons as well as teeth and other elements that we've collected, other fossils from them. Now, Michigan's cool because we don't only have a state rock and a state fossil, we also have a state gemstone, the Isle Royal Greenstone. This gemstone is another part of our history because long ago in the Upper Peninsula, we had volcanism, active areas of lava coming out. These active areas of lava created black basalt, which over time cracked and formed different minerals came in and resulted in the beautiful Isle Royal Greenstone, like you see here. Now, unfortunately, Isle Royal Greenstone, as its name implies, is only found on Isle Royal National Park. As such, it is illegal to collect Isle Royal Greenstone in nature. However, if you're willing to shell out a little bit of money, you can buy some fairly beautiful pieces of jewelry made with these stones. And of course, Michigan doesn't just have fossils. We also have tons of different minerals and rocks, including amethyst, agates, quartz, tiger eyes, whole tons of different things. Euperlite is really awesome. And in your kit, you have a nice little card with a bunch of different rocks and minerals that are found in Michigan. And on the back, there's a little bit of information about each one. So you can learn a little bit more about the geology and history of our area. Now, of course, all of this is fascinating, but I'm fairly sure that most of you are here to polish your Peteskey stone and learn how to do that. Now, for your Peteskey stone, we've given you a couple of different things. We've given you 3 different grits of sandpaper, a 220 grit piece, a 400 grit piece, and a 600 grit piece. We've also given you a small cloth, as well as some polishing compound, some car wax. So in just a minute, I'm going to go over the process to make this Peteskey stone really shine, just like these. So stay tuned, and we'll get right to those instructions. Okay. So in order to polish our Peteskey stone, there's first a couple of things that we need. Of course, we'll need those items that were in our kit. Our 3 different grits of sandpaper, our polishing compound, and our cloth. And one thing you'll need to provide is a cup of water. So The process for polishing our Peteskey stone is fairly simple, although a little bit labor intensive. This whole thing, from rough stone to polished, will probably take about 45 minutes. To get started with polishing, choose a side that has the pattern that you're looking for, that kind of rays of the rising sun pattern. If your stone's a little bit drab, you can get it wet, which will show you all of the pattern in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start by polishing this side here. Now, to polish your Peteskey stone, you're going to want to start with your 220 grit sandpaper. That's going to be the lighter tan. First, get a drop of water onto your stone. Then take your sandpaper and rub it in small concentric circles. You should start to see this kind of white slurry of rock dust build up. That lets you know that you are starting to polish your stone. Now you're going to want to do this for about 15 minutes. If you'd like to wait until you're done with the 220 grit step to learn the next step in polishing your stone, please pause the video here and resume once your 15 minutes of sanding are up. The next step after your 220 grit sandpaper is to move on to your 400 grit sandpaper, the slightly yellower piece. The same process applies. Add some water onto your stone and start sanding with those small concentric motions, small circular patterns. Now sometimes when you're sanding, your stone will get a bit dry. If that happens, just add a little bit more water and keep going. If you'd like to finish the 400 grit sandpaper sanding step, which is going to be another about 15 minutes of sanding, pause the video here before going on to the next step. The final step with our sandpaper is going to be our 600 grit sandpaper, this dark sandpaper. Again, same process. Get the stone wet and just start polishing. And once again, do this for about 10-15 minutes. If at the end you don't have a nice, smooth, somewhat shiny surface, just spend a little bit more time with the 600 grit sandpaper. Once you do have your stone to a nice, polished state, mine, of course, is not as polished as yours will be because I didn't do the full 15 minutes on each, we can go on to our next step, which is a polishing compound. So with your small cloth, get a little bit of the polishing compound. Then, once you have that compound, you can start to apply it to the area on your stone that you were polishing. And just like before, small circular motions are the best course of action. Keep buffing your stone until there's no longer any green, any streaks on the surface. And if you've done it right, you should have a nice, shiny Peteskey stone with that beautiful coral pattern visible. Now, if you're not satisfied with how shiny your stone is, you can always go back and repeat the sanding steps, starting with the 220 or the 400 grit sandpaper, and just go a little bit longer with each step. This will result in an even smoother, even shinier finish. So, thank you very much for watching our recorded version of our Rock Out program. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to natureeducation@oakgov.com, and we'll do our best to answer them. Stay safe, get outside, and thank you for attending. We'll see you next time.